The smell hit Daroven first, not rot, not chemicals, not the sharp mineral tang of a battlefield, but something he had no word for. Something between cooling metal and rain on dry stone. He stood at the edge of the tree line with his bolt cutter hanging loose in one hand and his headlamp cutting a pale wedge through the pre-dawn brush, and he stared at the shape on the ground and did not move for a long time. Behind him, his son Kessel pushed through the last stand of scrub pine and stopped when he heard his father stop. "What is it?" Darrow didn't answer right away. He tilted the headlamp down. The shape resolved itself. A body, lying face up in the dead grass, arms settled at its sides with an eerie composure, as though it had lain down rather than fallen. The skin, if it was skin, was the color of old bone. The face was a face in the way that a diagram of a face is a face, correct in its proportions, eyebrows where eyebrows should be, a mouth, a nose slightly flattened at the bridge, nostrils angled like the gills of something aquatic. The eyes were closed. Whatever it was roughly man-shaped. Roughly 6 feet, maybe more. The hands had one too many joints in the fingers. "Is it dead?" Kessel asked. "I don't know, is it? Are we? I don't know." Kessel was 23 years old and had worked the fabrication yard with his father since he was old enough to run cable. He had seen men lose fingers to the plasma cutters. He had seen a loading crane drop a crate of vacuum-sealed hull, plating onto a man's leg, and had been one of the 4 people who held the man down while the medic worked. He was not a person who went pale at ugly things. But he went pale now. "We should call someone," he said. Darrow crouched beside the body. He set the bolt cutter in the grass and brought the headlamp close. He studied the neck, the collar of the garment, something gray and seamless like a single-poured piece, and the hands, which were folded now that he looked more carefully, folded just slightly, the long-fingered hands resting against the abdomen with a deliberateness that he recognized from somewhere old in himself, something from before words, the posture of the laid-out dead. "Someone was here," Darrow said. "What? Someone put it like this." It didn't land this way. Kessel looked up and around at the brush, the dark, the silence of the fabrication yard's perimeter fence 50 meters away. A security light buzzed at the corner post. The night insects were doing what night insects did, indifferent. Who would? "I don't know." Darrow stood. He looked at the body for a long moment, and his face was doing something that Kessel could not read. Not curiosity exactly, not fear, not the flat professional assessment his father wore when something broke or something needed deciding. Something older than those things, something that sat below the jaw, in the throat. "Leave it," Kessel said. "We call the colonial office. We call the garrison. We. The garrison will come with weapons," Darrow said. "Yes. And then what? They shoot it? It's already dead. They'll study it. They'll take it." Darrow said this quietly. He was still looking at the face. "They'll take it somewhere sealed and sterile, and they'll cut it open and file a report, and nobody will ever say a word over it. Nobody will know its name. Nobody will think to ask if it had one." Kessel stared at his father. "It's an alien, Dad. I know what it is. It's not. You can't. I'm not doing anything." Darrow picked up the bolt cutter. He looked at the body once more. Then he looked at his son. "Come on. Work shift starts in 20 minutes. He walked back toward the yard. After a moment, Kessel followed. He looked over his shoulder once, twice. The ship lay in the grass, still and arranged in the dark. The fabrication yard on Covenant Station's southern shelf processed raw materials for the colony's expansion, hull plating, atmospheric struts, the interlocking segments of pressure habitat that went up in rings around the growing settlement. Daroven had run the orbital welder for 11 years. He was 51, which on a gravity-standard colony world meant his knees were bad and his hands were good, and he had learned not to trust anything he couldn't fix himself. He was a practical man. He had always been a practical man. He thought about the body all day. He thought about the hands, the deliberate placement of them. He thought about the smell, which had not been wrong exactly. Nothing rotten, nothing threatening, just deeply, fundamentally elsewhere. He thought about the face with its closed eyes and its strange gill nostrils, and the way the grass had been pressed flat in a rough circle around it, as though something had set it down carefully from above. He ate lunch alone at the end of the strut rack and looked out at the tree line. Kessel found him there. He sat down across from him on a crate and unwrapped a sandwich and did not say anything for a while. "You're thinking about it," Kessel said. "I'm not thinking about anything. You've got the face." "What face?" "The face you get when you've decided something and you're waiting for the right moment to tell me." Darrow looked at his sandwich. He had not eaten it. The garrison sent a patrol along the perimeter this morning, Kessel said. 2 soldiers. They walked the tree line. I watched them from the crane cab. Did they find it? They came back without stopping, so no. Kessel took a bite of his sandwich, chewed, looked at the ground. It's still out there, yes, in the daylight, yes. Someone's going to find it. Darrow said nothing. Someone's going to find it, Kessel said again. And it's going to be a very bad day for this colony, because everyone's going to know what it means. That they were close, that they were here, that one of them. He stopped, set the sandwich down. Whatever happened to it, whoever put it there, they were close enough to put it there. And the garrison's going to know that, and the colonial office is going to know that, and there'll be a lockdown, and that's going to be that. Yes, Darrow said, unless. Darrow looked at him. Kessel's jaw tightened. He picked the sandwich back up. I'm not saying we should. I'm observing the logical structure of the situation. The logical structure, Darrow said. Don't. I'm not doing anything. They sat for a while. The plasma cutters hummed across the yard. A loader trundled past on its magnetic track, carrying a rack of finished plating. It might not be dead, Kessel said finally. Darrow looked at him again. I'm just saying, we don't know. The eyes were closed. The chest, I didn't see it breathing, but I wasn't looking for it. I don't even know if they breathe. It was still. It was still, Kessel agreed. But there's kinds of still. Darrow looked back at the tree line. End of shift, he said. We go look again. Kessel exhaled slowly, the way he did when he'd gotten to an argument's destination and was too tired to be relieved about it. Yeah, okay. Yeah. End of shift was 1900, and by the time they'd clocked out and walked the perimeter, the light was going amber and long. They pushed through the scrub pine again, and Darrow's headlamp wasn't needed yet. The shape was still there. It had not moved. But Kessel had been right about there being kinds of still. There was the stillness of stone, and the stillness of machinery at rest, and the stillness of something that is containing itself. Darrow stood over the body and looked at the chest for a long time. The chest moved, not much, not like breathing. Like a tide, very slow, the faintest rise against the seamless garment, and then back down, and then nothing for 30 seconds, and then again. It's alive, Kessel said. It's something, Darrow said. What do we do? Darrow crouched. He studied the face. Close up, in the amber light, the features had a specificity that he hadn't fully registered in the dark. A scar below the left cheekbone, long-healed and smooth. The kind of mark that came from a very specific incident, rather than from a life of general wear. The mouth had a set to it, even slack and unconscious, that suggested will. Whatever this being had been before it ended up in the grass and the brush at the edge of a human fabrication yard on a colonial shelf on Covenant Station, it had been someone particular. It had not been a type. Help me, Darrow said. Help you what? Take the other side. Dad, we can't leave it here. We absolutely, categorically can leave it here. That is in fact the most defensible. Kessel, his son looked at him. Then he looked at the body. Then he made a sound in his throat that contained several entire arguments, compressed into a single exhaled syllable, and he moved to the other side. They carried it. It was heavier than it looked. Not crushingly heavy, but heavy the way machinery is heavy, with a density that didn't match the surface. The garment didn't tear. Nothing slipped. The being's head lolled once and then stayed at an angle, and Darrow kept having to remind himself not to support it, like he'd carry an injured person, not to cup the neck, because he didn't know if the neck worked the same way, didn't know if that instinct would help or hurt. They carried it through the tree line and across the back lot of the fabrication yard, in the long shadow of the strut racks, and into the equipment bay at the far end of the building, which was locked with a code that only Darrow knew. He'd run cable from this bay for 11 years, and nobody had ever asked him to justify keeping the combination private. He set the being down on the workbench with Kessel's help. The being's chest did its slow-tide thing. Otherwise, nothing. Kessel stood back and looked at it under the bay's work lights. In the full light, it was stranger, the proportions just slightly off. The skin, not skin, but something with a texture like skin over something that wasn't flesh. The fingers were long. The scar below the cheekbone had a companion mark on the neck, partially hidden by the collar. This is insane, Kessel said. Probably. If it wakes up, we'll deal with it. If the garrison finds it, they won't come in here. If Kessel stopped. He looked at his father. Why? That's what I can't get to. Why are we doing this? Darrow looked at the being's face. When I was your age, he said, I worked the outer processing rings on Meridian Station. There was a man there named Holst. He'd been there 20 years when I arrived, knew every system, every shortcut, every broken gauge, and where to kick the panel to get it reading right. He died on shift. Sector blowout in the D-ring. They shipped his body back to whatever origin record was still active for him. But that was 3 stations and 40 years in the past, and nobody was there anymore. They filed a death notice. That was it. Holst, deceased, 12 lines in the station log. He paused. I was the only one who said anything, at the service. 4 of us stood there, and I was the only one who said anything, and what I said wasn't enough, and it was never going to be enough, and I've thought about that for 30 years. Kessel was quiet. It's not the same, he said finally. No, Darrow agreed. It's not. He pulled up a stool and sat beside the workbench. He crossed his arms. He watched the slow tide of the alien chest. Go home, he said. I'll stay. I'm not leaving you alone with it. Kessel, I'm not. His son pulled up a second stool. But I want it on record that this is insane. Noted. It woke at 2 in the morning, not dramatically. No sudden gasp, no bolt upright, no film moment of wide eyes and desperate breath. One moment the chest was doing its slow tide. The next, the eyes were open. The eyes were amber. Not metaphorically amber, not hazel amber. Amber translucent, the color of the light that comes through old glass in late afternoon. And they moved. They moved across the ceiling of the equipment bay, and then they moved to Darrow, and then to Kessel, and then back to Darrow. And the movement was thoughtful in a way that bypassed the throat and went straight to something older. It did not move anything else. It lay on the workbench and looked at Darrow and breathed, actually breathed now, visible, chest rising and falling on a rhythm that was slower than human, but rhythmic, steady, deliberate. Darrow said hello. The being looked at him. I don't know if you understand me. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know. A lot of things. But you're safe. For now. I don't know how long for now lasts, but for right now, you're safe. Nothing from the being. The amber eyes moved to Kessel. That's my son, Darrow said. He thinks this is insane. He's probably right. But he stayed anyway. Something happened in the being's face. Not a smile. Not anything that mapped directly onto human expression. But a shift. Something in the set of the jaw. The faint change around the eyes. That was unmistakably a response. Unmistakably a communication of something, whether gratitude or assessment or recognition or all of those at once. Kessel said very quietly, okay, so it understands you, maybe. Something. What do we do? Darrow looked at the being. The being looked at Darrow. We find out what it needs, Darrow said. What it needed, it turned out, was water. Not urgently, it made no gesture of distress. But when Darrow held a canteen near its face and tilted it slightly, the being turned its head, just slightly, and drank. 3 swallows. Then it stopped, and Darrow set the canteen down, and they were all 3 quiet in the equipment bay with the work lights humming. The being's hands moved then. For the first time. Not reaching, not threatening. The long fingers uncurled from where they'd been resting against the abdomen, turned outward and lay open on the workbench. A gesture so straightforwardly human in its openness that Darrow felt something shift behind his sternum. Palms up, Kessel said. No weapons. That's a universal, right? That's got to be a universal. Something like it, Darrow said. He reached out, slowly, not reaching for the hands but pointing to himself, and said, Darrow. The being's amber eyes tracked his gesture. Something moved in the throat. A sound came out that was not a word, not in any sense Darrow knew, but was a sound with intention behind it, shaped by something like a larynx operating on different tolerances. Then it stopped. It's trying, Kessel said. Yes. It heard you say your name and it's trying, yes. The being made this again, shorter this time. Then it seemed to consider, and then it made a different sound. 3 syllables, precise, with a rhythm to them that Darrow could not reproduce but could feel as a rhythm. It said this sound, and then it stopped, and it looked at him. That's your name, Darrow said. That's what your name sounds like. The amber eyes. We can't say it. I'm sorry. We don't. Our mouths don't have the right. He stopped, thought. Can I give you something? Something we can say? Just so we're not, he gestured vaguely. Just for now. Until. If that's all right. The being looked at him for a long moment. Then the hands, still open, turned slightly. Just the wrists. Just a degree or two. Something that was not yes and was not no, and was perhaps permission to try. Darrow thought about Holst, the man who had known every broken gauge and where to kick the panel. The man who had been 12 lines in a station log. Holst, he said, the amber eyes held. The hands stayed open. Holst, Darrow said again, and the being's face did the thing it had done before. The not smile, the shift in the jaw, something communicating from behind the expression. And Darrow decided that was enough. 3 days. That was how long they had before it became untenable, and they all seemed to understand this without discussing it. The garrison's patrol had been twice more along the perimeter. Someone had noticed the pressed circle in the grass, and a report had been filed. The colonial office was reviewing atmospheric sensor data. There were conversations happening in levels above Darrow's pay grade and access that he could read the edges of in the tight-hunned faces of the yard supervisor, in the coded announcements that came over the work channel, in the subtle change in the security light cycle at the fence corner. Something was coming, something official and sealed and sterile. In the equipment bay, in the 3 days, Holst had learned to sit, then to stand slowly with Kessel's arm as a brace, the long body finding its calibration in this gravity, this air. It moved like a person relearning movement after illness, deliberate, testing each joint, each surface. When it stood fully and looked around the bay, it was still taller than either of them, and the proportions were still wrong. And the face was still a face in the way a diagram is a face. But it was also simply a person standing in a room taking stock of a situation. It had learned 6 words. Or rather, it had learned 6 sounds that were approximately the human words. Water, yes, no, careful, here, and inexplicably, bafflingly, the word wrench, which Kessel had been holding when Holst first tried to speak, and which had apparently attached itself to the lesson. Darrow had learned 3 of Holst's sounds. He was terrible at them, but Holst seemed to find this tolerable. Watching him attempt the syllables with the patient attention of someone who has decided to invest in a process they understand will be slow. On the second day, Holst had touched the scar on its own neck, the companion mark to the one below the cheekbone, and looked at Darrow and said 2 of its own sounds in a particular sequence that Darrow couldn't reproduce but recognized as a question. Then it had touched the wall of the equipment bay and said the same sequence. "Where are you?" Kessel said. "It's asking where it is. It knows where it is," Darrow said. "It knows this is a building. It's asking how it got here. Who brought it?" Holst's amber eyes moved between them. Darrow pointed to himself, then to Kessel, then he mimed lifting, arms under a weight, the motion of carrying. Then he pointed to the workbench. Holst was still for a moment, then the knot smile. Then it touched its chest with one open hand, a gesture with weight to it, and said 3 syllables slowly, looking at Darrow. "You're welcome," Darrow said, even though he didn't know if that was right. On the 3rd day, Holst was strong enough to move around the bay on its own. It examined the equipment with focused interest, the cable spools, the orbital welding apparatus, the racks of cutting tools. It did not touch anything without looking at Darrow first, and when Darrow nodded, it would examine the object carefully, turn it over in the 2 long fingers, and set it back exactly where it had been. It had excellent spatial memory. Darrow had always respected that in a person. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Kessel sat down on his stool and put his face in his hands. "The colonial office is sending an assessment team to the yard tomorrow," he said. "I heard it from the supervisor. They're calling it a structural audit." "It's not a structural audit." Darrow looked at Holst, who was examining a section of vacuum coupling with apparent interest. "No," Darrow said. "So tomorrow morning they come in here with their assessment team and their real reason for being here, and they find this." "And then what?" Holst set the vacuum coupling down. It turned and looked at them with the amber eyes. It had understood something in the tone, Darrow thought. Not the words, but the structure of the problem. The flattening of the conversation that meant consequence. "We have to move it," Kessel said. "We can't move it in daylight. The perimeter sensors. Then tonight. Before the team arrives." "Move it where?" Kessel was quiet. "Where?" Darrow said again, not in challenge, just the question was real. There was nowhere to move it that wasn't someone somewhere. There was no patch of wilderness on Covenant Station that wasn't monitored, mapped, patrolled. They were on a colonial station in the middle of a contact situation that nobody had decided how to handle yet, and the answer to where was simply nowhere that was safe. Holst made a sound. Both of them looked at it. It made the sound again, not the 6 words, not any of the learned vocabulary. Something new said carefully, with clear intent. It pointed at itself. Then it pointed up. Kessel said, "Up." Holst pointed up again, then touched its garment, the seamless gray piece, and then pointed up once more. "It has a way out," Darrow said. Kessel stood slowly. "It has a ship. It came from somewhere. There's a ship, or a signal, or a retrieval, something." Holst lowered its hand. It looked at Darrow, and the look was not simple. The look was the look of someone who has understood that this is a terminus, that the 3 days in the equipment bay are a closed thing, a finished thing, a thing that will not extend itself, and who is holding that understanding without flinching. You can call them, Darrow said. That's what you're saying. You can call them and they'll come for you. Holst's hand went to the scar on its neck, not touching it, hovering over it. A gesture toward the thing that connected it to wherever above meant. Then why didn't you do it before? Kessel said, not unkindly. Why didn't you signal as soon as you were awake? Holst looked at him, then at Darrow. Then it made a very quiet sound, just one syllable, and touched its chest again with the open hand, the same gesture it had made when Darrow explained how he had carried it in from the grass. The same weight to it. You were waiting, Darrow said, the amber eyes. You didn't know if you'd wake up safe. You were waiting to know. He stopped. And then you wanted to stay? A little. Before. Something in the jaw, the not smile, something more than that. Before you had to go back to being whatever this is, Darrow said. And he gestured at the space between them. The gap, the unbridgeable and bridged thing. Before you had to be, the problem. The contact situation. The whatever comes next. Holst's hand stayed on its chest. Yeah, Kessel said very quietly. Yeah, I get that. They went out at 3 in the morning. The same hour Holst had opened its eyes. The security light at the fence corner had its gap at 3:12. Darrow had watched it for 11 years and knew the cycle, and they moved through it in single file. Holst moving on its own now, still careful but capable, the long body finding its rhythm. The night insects were doing what night insects did. The amber of Holst's eyes caught the light briefly and then didn't. They stood in the pressed circle in the grass where it had lain 3 days ago. The grass had partially sprung back, not entirely. Holst stood in the center of the circle. It turned and looked at the fabrication yard, at the security light, at the dark strut racks and the fence. It stood there for a moment in what seemed to Darrow like the same act of looking he did when he walked out to the car at the end of a shift. The brief pause to take in the familiar and file it somewhere it would keep. Then it looked at him. I know, Darrow said. I know it. We don't have the words for any of this. Holst made 3 syllables. Slowly, the sound of its name, not approximated, not adjusted for human hearing, just exactly what the name was, offered into the air. Darrow listened. He tried to hold it. I won't get it right, he said. I can't. But I'll remember the shape of it. Holst nodded. The nod was perfect, unambiguous, universal, borrowed, or parallel evolved, or simply the only gesture that could have meant what it meant at that moment. Then it looked at Kessel. Kessel said, take care of yourself. I don't know if that translates. Take care of yourself. The not smile. The jaw. And then something else. Holst turned back to Darrow and raised one hand, palm out, and held it there. The gesture from before, the open palms on the workbench, the no weapons, no threat but elevated now, held up between them like a door being propped open. Darrow raised his hand the same way. Palm out. Held it there. They stood like that for a moment. A man with bad knees and good hands, and 30 years of thinking about what he should have said, and something from somewhere else that had lain in the grass and been carried into the light and given water, and a name it couldn't keep. And the night insects made their sounds, and the security light cycled through its gap, and somewhere in the orbital dark above Covenant Station, something woke up and began to move. The signal from the scar on Holst's neck was silent. Darrow didn't see it go out, but he felt the change, a shift in the air, something like the pressure differential before a storm. And then Holst's face changed, and whatever had been waiting in the dark above began its descent. Not fast, careful. Whatever came down slowly, and it came down in the tree line beyond their sight. And there were no lights and no sounds except the insects and the distant hum of the fabrication yard, and the faint subsonic sensation of something very large settling at the edges of human perception. Holst lowered its hand. It looked at Darrow one more time, the amber eyes, the scar, the particular set of the jaw. Then it turned and walked into the trees, and the dark took it. Darrow stood in a circle of pressed grass for a long time. Kessel stood beside him and didn't say anything, which was the right thing. The security light went through its cycle. The insects continued. Somewhere in the tree line, something very large quietly ceased to be there. They'll still come tomorrow, Kessel said eventually. The assessment team. They'll find the equipment bay, and they'll see the workbench, and there'll be questions. I know. What are we going to say? Darrow thought about it. We found it, he said. A body in the brush. Unknown origin. We brought it inside. I'll take the hit for that, you defer to me. And then it recovered and left on its own. They won't believe it. No. But it's what happened. They'll want to know why we didn't report it immediately. Yes. What do you say to that? Darrow looked at the tree line. at the dark, at the ordinary and unbroken surface of it. No trace, no mark, no evidence except the grass they were standing on, which would finish springing back in a few more days. I say that when I found it, Darrow said, it was laid out, deliberate, arms arranged. Someone had taken care with it. He paused. I say I didn't know if it was dead. I say I didn't want to leave something alone in the dark when I didn't know. Kessel was quiet. They'll still probably fire me, Darrow said. Yeah? Worth it? Kessel looked at his father, at the face that was doing the thing again, the thing below the jaw, in the throat. He'd spent 23 years learning to read that face, and he still didn't have a full vocabulary for it. He thought he understood more of it now. We should go, Kessel said. They went. They fired Darrow 3 weeks later, after the assessment team had come and gone and filed a report that he was not allowed to read. Kessel kept his job, partly because he was good at it, and partly because Darrow had taken the weight of the decisions onto himself and stuck to it through 2 sessions with colonial security and 1 formal interview with a woman from an office that didn't have a public name. The woman from the nameless office asked him many questions, most of which he answered in the same terms. I didn't want to leave something alone in the dark when I didn't know. She asked him if the entity had communicated anything. He said yes. She asked what it had communicated. He said it had communicated that it was grateful and that it intended to leave, and it had done both. She asked if it had said anything about where it came from, where it was going, what its people's intentions were toward the colony. Darrow thought about the open palms on the workbench, the 3 syllables of a name he couldn't reproduce, the not smile that had no direct translation, the hand held up between them in the pressed circle, the universal and parallel and unbridgeable thing. No, he said. Nothing about any of that. She looked at him for a moment with the flat professional face of someone trained to assess the gap between what a person says and what a person knows. Did you know, she said, that 3 days after your contact window, we detected 17 objects in high orbital transit above Covenant Station, holding pattern, no hostile actions, no communication attempts, 17 objects, and then they left. Darrow said nothing. What do you think that was about, she asked. He thought about Holst standing in the pressed circle, looking at the fabrication yard, at the security light, at the dark strut racks and the fence, filing it somewhere it would keep. He thought about the open hand and his own hand raised to meet it. I think, Darrow said, that they came to make sure it got home. The woman looked at him, and when they saw that it had, Darrow said they left. She closed her file. He found work 6 months later at a smaller yard on the colony's eastern shelf, running cable the way he always had, with good hands and bad knees and nothing that needed to be justified. Kessel came to visit on the 3rd Sunday. He brought sandwiches. They sat on a crate at the end of the strut rack and ate and looked out at the tree line. A different tree line, a different yard. But tree lines are more or less the same everywhere. Colonial office is saying it was a weather anomaly, Kessel said. The orbital objects, they're saying instrument error. Sure, and the contact event has been classified. Anybody who asks officially gets told there was no contact event. Okay, you don't care. I care. Darrow looked at the tree line, at the place where the dark started, at the ordinary and continuing surface of things that had once had something else inside them. But what I care about isn't the same thing they're worried about. Kessel nodded. Do you think it's okay? Kessel asked. Holst, wherever it went. Darrow thought about the scar, about the hands, about the face with its specific healed marks of a specific survived life, not a type, a person. Someone who had gone down and come up again, and lain in the grass, in the brush, at the edge of a human fabrication yard, and been found by a man with bad knees who had never stopped thinking about what he should have said. I think they came to get it, Darrow said. 17 ships. They came 17 ships to make sure it got home. That's... He stopped, looked for the word. That's not nothing. No, Kessel said. It's not. They ate their sandwiches. The insects did what insects do. The tree line held its ordinary dark, which was not empty and had not been empty since, and would not be. And Darrow Venn sat at the end of the strut rack and thought about names and the shapes they leave in the air after the person who carried them is gone. And found that the weight was the same as always and also different, and that different was enough. He had said something. It had not been enough. It never would be. But he'd stayed through the night and held the hand up in the pressed grass and watched the amber eyes and learned the rhythm of a name he couldn't say. And tomorrow he would run cable, and the hands would be good, and the tree line would be there. That was enough. That was the thing about humans, though nobody had written it in a report, and nobody from any nameless office had thought to put it in a file. They stayed. When the thing in the grass was strange and the dark was doing its dark business, and the rational course was to leave and call someone official, they stayed. They brought water. They made a sound that was supposed to be a name and were embarrassed that they got it wrong and tried again. They pulled up a stool and sat there all night, and in the morning they tried the word wrench and did not laugh when the alien tried to say it back. 17 ships had come to make sure one of theirs got home. One man had crouched in the brush before dawn with a headlamp and a bolt cutter and decided not to leave. It wasn't the same. But somewhere in the space between those two things, between the fleet and the crouched man, something had been said that words in any language couldn't carry. And it had been received, and that was what it was, what it had always been, the specific and stubborn and ridiculous human thing. You stay. You give water. You try the name even badly. You hold the hand up in the dark. You say, someone born of two souls lay here. Someone was loved and feared and hoped and arrived at this grass in this dark and was not alone in it. You say that with your hands, if not your mouth, with your staying, if not your words. And somewhere, above 17 ships holding pattern in the orbital dark, something looks down at a pressed circle in the grass and understands.